Greetings, great brethren. Today, this is Turkey Day, so you guys are celebrating Thanksgiving with your family and loved ones, which is cool. I do not celebrate it, but at the end of the day, I got a little bit of a drop for you guys. Hope you like it. Keep it simple, keep it short. Let's get it.
Today, when we consider what the limits of the power of the President of the United States are, and what mechanisms exist to rein in presidential abuse of authority, we tend to think of constraints within the executive branch, things like special prosecutors and such. Thus, much of our focus is on criminal law and on whether and when an investigator can or should be appointed by the executive branch. But that view is ahistorical. Since the nation was founded, much, perhaps even most of the restraint on executive authority has been exercised by the other two branches of government, the legislature and the judiciary. For as long as the American Republic has existed, Congress has investigated presidents and their conduct. The courts, for their part, have ordered presidents to conform their conduct to the law. And so, as a matter of historical practice, most of the oversight of presidents is grounded in the other branches of government and founded on our conception of checks and balances or the separation of powers. In this lecture, we'll take a brief look at these ideas, how they've been implemented, and the extent to which they constrain executive abuse. Early on, it wasn't even clear whether Congress had the power to investigate the conduct of a president or the executive branch. The investigation of the St. Clair disaster set the precedent. Back in September 1791, during George Washington's first term as president, General Arthur St. Clair set out from Fort Washington, what is today the city of Cincinnati, with a force of 1,400 American soldiers. Their mission was to construct new forts that would be used as bases from which to fight the Indian tribes that were in conflict with settlers in the Ohio Territory. November 3rd, 1791, proved to be a fateful day. St. Clair's troops made camp for the night, but didn't bother to build a defensive perimeter. Big mistake. The Indians attacked in the middle of the night, and St. Clair's forces, poorly trained and without any earthworks to hide behind, were badly mauled. St. Clair naturally decided that retreat was necessary, but most of the troops did more than retreat. They broke and ran. St. Clair lost 650 men that day, and another 270 were wounded, well over half his force. It was likely the most significant Indian victory over American forces in the history of the nation. By contrast, just by way of example, the losses of Lieutenant General George Custer's forces at the Battle of Little Bighorn totaled only 268 men. Scholars Doug Kreiner and Eric Schrickler tell us what happened next in their book, Investigating the President, Congressional Checks on Presidential Power. When Congress convened in Washington the next year, back in early times, Congress did not sit in near continuous session as it does now, some of the members of the House of Representatives pushed for an investigation of the disaster. The very request was itself controversial, both in the House and in the executive branch. At this stage in the nation's history, much of our philosophy of governance was still being worked out in practice. In the House, some members thought that a congressional investigation was inappropriate. Their view was that under the separation of powers doctrine, only the executive branch could review its own conduct. In addition, there was a political dimension. They were reluctant to embarrass President Washington, who was the most highly regarded person in the new nation. Others, however, took the contrary view. They saw the separation of powers not as a prohibition on one branch examining the conduct of another, but as a means of checking the growth of power in any branch. An article published in the Federalist Papers under the name Publius, the pen name used by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, put it this way, quote, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. On this view, the competition of co-equal branches was a check on authority. In the end, this latter version of separation of powers won the day and the argument. Congress chartered a select committee to examine the disaster, and in order to ground the inquiry clearly in its own powers, it made one particular focus the expenditure of public money. Now, just because Congress thought it had the power to investigate, that didn't mean that the executive was bound to agree. When the committee asked the War Department for records, it caused a fair amount of consternation in the cabinet, or so Thomas Jefferson tells us. Nobody was sure whether or not the House had the authority to make such a request for information, or whether the Washington administration had a duty to answer. Ultimately, President Washington set a precedent, as he did with so many things, and he agreed to provide the requested information, though he also reserved the right to hold back any information he thought might endanger public safety. In effect, Washington asserted for the first time what we've come to think of as an executive privilege.
Okay. So, brothers, for the most part, you're going to be told a lot of lies this day. One of the lies you're going to be told is that the Indians just laid down and they so-called didn't fight. And this is in Ohio Valley region. And what happened is that fort, which was in Cincinnati, and that individual, St. Clair, who actually went and fought, they actually, as discussed in one of my videos years ago, you had the Battle of Fort Detroit with Tecumseh, who, if you go and look over across Detroit River in Canada, there's actually a city called Tecumseh because at one time Canada did actually have control over Michigan. You had the French and British. The British end up supporting and backing Indians from the Ohio Valley region, Ohio. This is who they're talking about. And what occurred was the British, just like they did then, left. They ran away. Turncoat. They jettisoned. Okay? And then the French end up, instead of backing up the Ohio Valley region Indians, the French end up running roughshod through the Indians because they did not have enough men to actually fight. In general, that's why they actually got with the British to help out with the war effort. And then we have a St. Clair Shores. Just saying. So that's why St. Clair Shores is named after St. Clair. He was a loser who lost often. All right, brothers. That's it.